All right, let me bring in my guests for this hour. Joining me, criminal defense attorneys Jack Rice and David Bruno are with me. Gentlemen, a real pleasure and an honor to have you guys with me today. We got a lot to get to. Let me start with the Murdaugh case, and I'll start with you, David. I want to get your thoughts on the beginning of the state's case and some of this interesting cross-examination, questioning the integrity of the crime scene and, of course, the investigation.
Yeah, sure. First off, I think everybody watching this could relate to the crime scene tape that we frequently see everywhere. And the purpose of that is to keep people away, to preserve the evidence so that investigators can come in and process the scene methodically and preserve evidence so that defense attorneys can't walk into court and do exactly what they're doing right here. The integrity of the investigation. And defense is doing a great job showing that they failed to preserve certain things, that there's footprints around. You have one captain pointing the finger at other agencies. They're not aligned, right? And it's not just going to the admissibility or the weight of the evidence. This also goes to the credibility of the investigation in general, because I would imagine there's going to be attack after attack after attack. And Michael, that confirmation bias that we talk about oftentimes was brought up here. Basically, they knew it was Murdaugh right from the onset. And what that does to investigators is that they push every single inference and piece of evidence into the theory of that case, and it really blinds them into other inferences and arguments on pieces of evidence. So that's what we're seeing today. Attack on the integrity of the crime scene, which is ultimately going to be an attack on the investigation in general.
Yeah, and Jack Rice, quickly, he's exactly right. It's going to be a theme of the defense. And in a lot of cases, this line of questioning or this approach can be a Hail Mary. It's because you got nothing else to work with. But here, I feel like it's legit.
Yeah, you know, Michael, I'm with you. I mean, that's usually what I see too, right? You sort of do this because you have nothing else. But when you can come out of the chute and you can say, I have incompetent cops and I have over-promising prosecutors, all of those do one thing. That means they got the wrong guy. And we can show you again and again and again. And the real benefit to this is that you can show where they're incompetent, but then what you do is you springboard that into everything else that the state presents and say, you shouldn't even doubt what they say they have, that even seems like they have, because those guys are incompetent too. And that has real value with a very, very good defense attorney.
No question about it. And it has that ripple effect, just like you mentioned. There's that ripple effect. All right, guys, stand by, because I want to bring in a very special guest right now. Here with us to discuss the Murdaugh case, the attorney for one of the Murdaugh victims, Joe McCullough. Now, he's been in the courtroom throughout the day. When I say Murdaugh victims, Paul Murdaugh was involved in a boating accident, Joe. You represented somebody involved in that situation. We put the moniker victim on it for that purpose. But, Joe, I want to get your reaction. You've been in the courtroom all day. I can see you clearly on the Court TV cameras. Your reaction to what we're seeing, Dick Harpootlian in particular, a friend of yours, someone you've practiced with. I'd love to get your thoughts.
Well, you know, this, because of the burden of proof and because this is a circumstantial case, presenting a case as a prosecutor is kind of this glacial, monotonous, very tedious for the jury, very taxing. So it's a little bit easier for the defense to look good. Dick's been punching, he's had his reasonable doubt hole puncher out all day. He's been working on, every witness is a tool, and the prosecution is using them to build the foundation for their case to come, which is going to be about their timeline and so forth. But some things came out today through the cross-examination by the defense that really helped this somebody else did it theory of the case, and that the police had blinders on. And so Dick ended on a pretty high note with a 26-year veteran of this department that was on scene in charge of the investigation, and he got this guy to concede they saw unaccounted for tire marks, footprints. They didn't preserve the evidence. For the first time, I learned today that Paul Murdaugh's truck was found miles away in another county. You know, clearly, Murdaugh was a busy guy if he did this, from at least the evidence that's on the table now. But the defense has done a pretty darn good job of creating this concept that there is a lot of evidence to suggest that the police put blinders on, And Dick ended asking this investigator, why in the world, if you had no suspect in mind when you left that night, did your department the very next morning announce the public was safe, they had nothing to fear? Instead of issuing that statement, the question hangs in the air, why wasn't there an APB or a BOLO out, not just for Paul's truck, which was testified to, but for the two shooters?
Yeah.
2 guns, 2 people, lots of tire tracks, unexplained footprints. I mean, there's a lot of reasonable doubt here so far.
Yeah,
but it's early in the
Joe, it's never a good
process.
thing when the agencies are pointing the finger at each other. You know, that's a bad start, as mentioned by David Bruno. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was, I guess the state was trying to make some hay out of the fact that the very first thing when they arrive on the scene that is said by the defendant in this case is sort of laying the groundwork for an alibi. And it had to do with the fact that Paul was involved in this boat accident, which you're intimately aware of, and that it might have had something to do with that. Give me your thoughts on the idea that that boat accident caused a lot of problems for Paul, as expressed by Alex Murdaugh that day, and that it's a possibility this situation sprung from that.
Well, of course that's a possibility, and you know.
But was it that big of a deal, Joe? Was there that kind of acrimony surrounding that boat accident that this type of brutal murder could come from it?
Well, I don't know of any evidence that there was this great fallout between father and son over that. Clearly, a lot of people have attributed this fall of the dynasty of the House of Murdaugh to that boat accident as the first domino. But there's not much evidence that I'm aware of that caused the kind of schism that would turn Alex Murdaugh into what people are calling a family annihilator. I'm not aware of that. So I don't know whether that's got legs ultimately or not, and that really has not been the motive suggested by the prosecution, who really have suggested it's more in the financial arena and the potential discovery and killing everybody who's going to solve that problem somehow. I mean, a lot of this doesn't make sense, and the prosecution's got a heavy responsibility to tie all these things up in a bow at the end of their case.
Well, Joe, I was actually talking about the opposite way for the defense, that it's positive for the defense, suggesting that there were these other issues with that case, that someone else from that situation might have been the person responsible for Paul. So what I'm asking you is, was there that kind of acrimony from that case involving other people that someone else might have been involved?
You know, I didn't see it. Now, I was a month late getting into the case, but when I became involved, I did not see this great groundswell of anger at the Murdaugh family. I know people, there were detractors. I became aware of the testimony today that from this 911 tape when Alex Murdaugh said that his son had been threatened, receiving threats, had been punched. I haven't heard that from law enforcement, that there were concerns and reports of that. So, you know, again, the prosecution, if they want to take that somewhere, they're going to have to tie it up with complaints by the Murdaugh family to protect them. But also, I think if those threats were made, you have to ask yourself, this family with lots of money, everybody thought, why didn't they have security? Why didn't they have surveillance cameras? Why didn't they have guards? Why didn't the family move to a more secluded, well, this was plenty secluded, but a safer area, I guess. So I just don't know whether that was his first thought, that it was someone in the community.
All right, fair enough, Joe. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Truly appreciate it. We'll be touching base with you throughout the trial. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Dave, Jack, you guys are going to be standing by. We have a lot more to discuss today. Folks, when we come back.